Chad Gadya, Chad Gadya, Dizavim Abba Bitrezus, Chad Gadya, Chad Gadya, Ve'ata Shunra Ve'acha Lagadya, Chad Gadya, Chad Gadya. Then came the cat, then came the, and then came the stick, and then came the, and then came the, and then came the ox, and then came the shochet, and then came the angel of death, and then came the Kadosh Baruch Hu. Kol hakavod. So we've studied Chad Gadya in the past. This medieval children's song is understood to be a metaphor for the Jewish people who, like the goat, have been tormented over the years by many nations, symbolized by the cat, the dog, the stick, etc. This morning, I'd like to pause over one character in the list, the Malach HaMavet, the angel of death. I turn to this topic today as we approach Yizkor as a way to reflect on life and death, but also as a lens through which to consider Israel's new law regarding the death penalty. The Malach HaMavet, the angel of death, does not appear anywhere in the Tanakh, but it is found frequently in rabbinic literature and in Jewish folklore. The Talmud and Midrash, for example, paint colorful pictures of the angel of death. He's variously described as a demon, as an ogre, as a man holding a sword dripping with poison. He's described as being made entirely of eyes, and also that he is married to Lilith, who is a partner with him in death. In some references, the Malach HaMavet acts independently from God. This reflects the influence, perhaps, of polytheism on Judaism. But in normative Judaism, the angel of death, as his name implies, is a malach, is a messenger charged with administering God's decrees. That point is made clear in the end of Chad Gadya. Then came the shochet, who slaughtered the ox. Then came the Malach HaMavet, who slaughtered the shochet. And then came the Holy One of Blessing, who killed the Malach HaMavet. In this hierarchy, God is above and in charge of the Malach HaMavet, which also implies that God's values are to inform how we see and understand and interact with death. As Jews, we believe that death is a natural part of life. At the same time, we are taught to choose life, to treasure life, to preserve life if at all possible, and of course, to sanctify life. When we kill, such as in war, we do so in the service of life, to protect and to guard lives. We take no joy in killing. That's why today, for example, we only recite part of Hallel. Our celebration is incomplete because our liberation came at the expense of the Egyptians. Now, to be clear, sometimes it is necessary to kill. But God is the God of life, Melech Hafetz B'chaim, who even in death demands that we uphold our humanity. And that is what makes this new law in Israel, I would say, not just a shanda, but a chilul Hashem, a desecration of God's name. In case you have not followed the news, just before Pesach, the Knesset passed a law with strong support, 68 in favor, 48 opposing, the law that approves the death penalty for terrorists. When the vote was announced, Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir, who wears a gold lapel pin in the shape of a noose, popped a bottle of champagne in the Knesset to celebrate. There's much to say about the death penalty in Jewish law. For now, I'll just offer a few cliff notes. The Torah regularly commands the punishment of death. 36 different transgressions, from violating Shabbat to worshiping idols to cursing your parents, are punishable by death, by stoning, burning, sword, and by hanging. But look closer and you'll see that the Torah and later the Talmud severely curtailed the application of this punishment. For example, they strictly regulated the rules governing witnesses and testimony. In this way, the rabbis effectively abolished capital punishment because the human justice system is fallible and because executing wrongly convicted individuals is a gross violation. Capital punishment, it seems, was largely left up to God. And a Sanhedrin that executed someone just once in 7 years was considered to be a destructive court. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah went further, saying that if they executed a criminal once in 70 years, they would be a destructive court. Now, to be fair, there are other voices in our tradition. The Talmud's Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel worries that eliminating capital punishment altogether would increase murderers among Jews. And Maimonides rules that a king on his own has the authority to execute a murderer. Creating deterrent, he says, is an act of tikkun olam. All of this is to say that the death penalty in Jewish tradition is complex and nuanced. Jumping ahead to modern times, Israel inherited the mandatory Palestine Code of Law, which included capital punishment for several crimes. At the establishment of the state, both the Ashkenazi and the Sephardi chief rabbis opposed capital punishment. And in 1954, Israel abolished the death penalty for murder and has not executed anyone, with one famous exception. As you clearly know, in 1962, Holocaust architect Adolf Eichmann was hanged for genocide and crimes against humanity. The new law passed by the Knesset imposes the death penalty on people convicted of fatal terrorist attacks. It's mandatory and must be carried out within 90 days of sentencing. In military courts, the death penalty is the default. Only Palestinians are tried. In civilian courts, both Israelis and Palestinians are tried, but the law applies only to those whose act is aimed at destroying the existence of the State of Israel. This is a definition designed to exclude Jewish terrorists. In other words, the law effectively enshrines capital punishment for Palestinians alone. Chaverim, I have friends who were killed by Palestinian terrorists. I understand the instinctual desire to kill convicted terrorists. And I understand that hardened terrorists have been released from Israeli prisons only to return to their deadly terror acts. But I believe this law is unethical, it is dangerous, and it would be a blemish on Israel's soul. Can you imagine it, really? Hangings is what I associate what they do in Iran, not in Israel. And it should go without saying that opposition to this legislation in no way diminishes my and our support for Israel's fight against Hamas, Hezbollah in Iran. Executing terrorists will create no deterrence. The death penalty never does. On the contrary, the new law will further undermine Israel's international standing. It may inflame the Arab world. And as the current chief Sephardi Rabbi Yitzhak Yosef said, speaking out against the law, it will put diaspora Jews in greater risk, making them a target of revenge attacks. Perhaps worst of all, I believe it will forever associate our God, our Torah, our people, and our state with death rather than with life. In the name of the sanctity of life, we know that fighting terror is of the utmost importance, wrote Rabbi Ari Haist on behalf of the Masorti movement in Israel. But even in the face of the cruelest realities, we refuse to countenance a law that goes against so many principles we hold dear. We must always remember that Judaism's emphasis on the sanctity of life applies to all people, of all religions and all nationalities. A law that is meant to protect Jewish or Israeli life, but is cavalier with Palestinian life, goes against one of the most basic principles of Judaism. We must reject this law, he concludes, and insist on proper due process and justice for all, brought before the court regardless of nationality or crime accused. We read in Sefer Shemot in the book of Exodus about the 10th plague. There, the angel of death, referred to as simply as the Mashchit, the destroyer, killed the firstborn Egyptians, but spared the Israelites. Were it not for the Malach HaMavet, we might still be slaves in Egypt. But as much as killing was and sometimes is necessary, we don't celebrate. We certainly don't glamorize the angel of death with a gold lapel pin in the shape of a noose, not even when that killing is warranted, not even for the sake of life, not even to preserve life. How tragic it would be, therefore, if having escaped Egypt, we returned to a culture of Mitzrayim. Recall that ancient Egyptians were obsessed with death. They built monuments, monumental buildings to defy death. Their most famous text is the Book of the Dead. By contrast, the lives that we build in this world, the values and the lessons that we embody and pass on, they are our pyramids. They are our eternal monuments, transmitted midor lador from generation to generation. Ours is a Torah Chaim, a Torah of life that teaches us about the preciousness of life. No, Jews and Judaism must stand as the living opposite of Egypt's cult of death and Hamas's culture of death. As the hour for Yizkor approaches, I'm reminded of a folk tale. It comes to us from Salonika, Greece. Once there was a man who was down on his luck. He didn't have a penny to his name. One day, the week before Pesach, the man went for a stroll on the beach. He was consumed by questions like, how will I be able to celebrate the Seder? As he walked, a figure off in the distance seemed to be coming directly toward him. It was the Malach HaMavet, disguised as a person. Why are you so sad? The angel asked. My house is so empty, and Pesach is coming, said the poor man. Come, we'll make a deal, replied the angel of death. I'll give you 100 gold denarii for you to prepare a festive Seder. But as soon as you make Kiddush, I'll arrive at your house and I'll ask you 3 questions. If you answer them, you'll stay alive and you'll stay rich. But if you can't answer them, I'll take you with me and you will die. What do you say to this challenge? Feeling like he had no choice, the man agreed. He took the money, returned home, and told his wife about the agreement. Are you crazy? She said. The man answered, our holy Torah says that one who does not celebrate Pesach will be cut off from heaven. So it was a no-win situation. At least we can have one final Pesach together. And so the man went to buy all the supplies, and his wife cooked and prepared and set a beautiful table just as it should be. When the time for the Seder arrived, everyone gathered around the table, but no one dared recite the Kiddush. And so with the table full of delicacies and the story waiting to be told, they just sat and sat until all of a sudden there was a knock on the door. You can imagine their fear and trepidation at that moment. The man gently peered through the peephole to open the door. It was an old peddler, a poor man down on his luck. Might you have room at your table? He asked through the door. But of course, said the man. The wife welcomed him in and gave him a seat of honor at the Seder table. But when it came time to make Kiddush, once again, everyone just sat there. The old peddler wondered to himself, why aren't they making Kiddush? Just then, there was another knock on the door. It was none other than the Malach HaMavet. Don't answer it, I'll get it, said that old peddler who had just arrived. He called out, who's knocking on the door? Is that you, old man? Asked the Malach HaMavet, for he recognized his voice. I have news to share. Please open the door. But the old peddler was stubborn. Try as the angel did with riddles and with tricks, he could not convince the peddler to open the door, until all of a sudden the Malach HaMavet disappeared in a gust of wind. "You may now start the Seder," said the old peddler, who was, of course, none other than Eliyahu Hanavi, Elijah. Because of his commitment to the Seder, to its rituals and to its lessons, because he opened his home and opened his heart, because he treated the old poor peddler with kavod and saw in him a man created b'tselem Elohim, Elijah saved the husband from the Malach HaMavet. Chaverim, we know that life doesn't always work this way. The angel of death can't always be held back. Eventually, he will come to take our loved ones and take us. Until the day that arrives, hopefully soon, she'yavo b'meira b'yameinu, that Elijah will lead us in singing, Chad Gadya, V'ata Kadosh Baruch Hu, V'shachat et Malach HaMavet, that God will kill the Malach HaMavet and death will be no more. Until then, let us raise our glasses to make Kiddush, not just to toast a l'chaim over wine, but to sanctify our lives by the laws and values that we uphold, by the lives we protect, by the dignity we safeguard, and by the justice and peace we pursue. Ken Yiratzon v'nomar. Amen.